Welcome back to Side Quest episode 39, Final Fantasy VII, episode 24, and back with me is my esteemed colleague, Mr. Wesley Schantz. Welcome back, Mr. Wesley Schantz.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going really well. It's a nice Saturday afternoon. It's actually kind of ugly here in San Diego, so this is a good day to be playing video games and to be talking about video games. And today we had another big day, another huge day, I suppose you might say, and featuring the submarine mission and also Rocket Town, the depths and the heights.
That's right. Beyond the heights. Yeah.
Right, and a dream fulfilled. And so how about we start with, well, is there anything in particular you wanted to address immediately? Are there, sorry, my microphone's sort of acting up right now, and I hope I just fixed it. I think I did. Good. So could you walk us through what it is that we saw today, seeing Rude, going back to Rocket Town, a dream fulfilled, the huge materia, getting the submarine, and also tell me anything tell us anything in particular that stuck out to you that you would like to discuss. I know you've actually been through this part for some time now. I need to catch up with you.
The submarine part I did last week, but the Rocket Town part I just did this morning. So it's a weird part of the game in that you've unlocked, after you get the submarine, you unlock a number of side quests that maybe weren't possible before or weren't worth doing before, at least from my perspective. I think you could probably start doing chocobo racing even a little earlier if you really wanted to. Once you get the high wind, that's something you can kind of spend some time doing. But at least for me, I was kind of more engaged with the story for that. But once I got the submarine and started to kind of explore with that a little bit, then I decided, yeah, this is chocobo racing time. So that's kind of what I was doing in the meanwhile here. And so that's the other element of the land travel, like we were talking about at the end of last time. You kind of have this little framework, right, of various kinds of physical journeys, which map kind of onto a more psychological or inner journey, which is like, represented pretty literally in going into Cloud's mind in the previous section. And this time now it's more metaphorical in that you're going around underwater, dodging a monster which is way beyond you, fighting some really scary things down in the sunken airship. So like that example of the heights that have crashed down, like Icarus, into the sea, and possibly rescuing some huge materia from the rocket ship before it flies way too high and bursts against meteor with very little effect.
Yeah, and I was wondering whether that limited effect was because it to mess with magic, or whether it was because the huge materia was not part of the attack as it was intended. What did you make of that?
I actually was curious about that too, and I read online to see if the cutscene looks any different depending on whether you take the materia or not. Apparently it doesn't make a difference, and I'm pretty sure when I played this game as a kid, I had no idea how to figure out what the 4-digit code was, and so I don't think I got that piece of huge materia, and it blew up into meteor, and all it means is that you can't get the final form of the Bahamut, the dragon summon, when you go back and look at all the huge materia that you managed to gather. So yeah, I think what it seems to be saying is this is a flawed plan, like from the start. The idea that you can smash a rocket full of huge materia into meteor and actually avert the catastrophe is simply wrong-headed. And Sid has some interesting stuff to say about science and magic. It sort of puts it on your radar if you haven't already been thinking about it. But I really don't see that as that big of a dichotomy or anything in this game. It's like no matter what, you're dealing with forces which are transcendent with respect to any human capability, whether it be magical or scientific. You're dealing with something from a different kind of realm entirely. And I mean, I think Sid represents a kind of brave stance towards that. Like we're gonna try to do our best, and in a way even Shinra do as well, because this is their best shot, right? But ultimately there's a different confrontation that's going to have to happen for the world to be saved. Are you there? Or did your microphone finally give up the ghost?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't know how much I got there, but I'll just start from the beginning. So along the lines of what Sid was saying about science and magic, and along the lines of the huge materia discussion, I was interested in getting your perspective on why the huge materia is so valuable, and why is it exactly that we've been chasing it so often, and what does Sid mean when he says it's the accumulated knowledge of the past, or wisdom of the past, and why does that make it valuable, and what use can it be put to? Besides, and exactly, since it is like something like 220 times stronger than normal materia, what use can it be put to?
Yeah, see, I think that there's a kind of a theory at work there, that materia is the crystallized life stream, essentially, right? And so if the life stream involves contacting a kind of energy which has existed and will continue to exist outside of the instantiations in individual people, then in some way its value is simply like inherent. Like you shouldn't use it for any purpose other than to like restore life to the planet, essentially, right? Like that's kind of the argument in a way that Barrett's making at the start, like taking this materia, artificially manipulating it, taking it out of the stream or the process of the planet is detrimental to everyone's health and well-being, right? And so to jettison it from the planet entirely to try to blow up the meteor is like incredibly contradictory or something like that, right? It's like it's an incredible waste, and I think that's sort of like what you get with Bugenhagen as well, like when he's trying to explain what the life stream is when you first go there, and I know that we're clued in that we're supposed to take the huge materia back to him at this point, and he's going to be able to maybe tell us something more about what exactly it's for, and what might be possible still, since trying to fight meteor head on is not going to work.
And so something else I just wanted to note from this time playing and last time playing for you, from the submarine section, but also to some extent from the Rocket Town one, is that what's been so horrifying for you and what was such a revelation was that you were just a Shinra soldier and not Zack or the equal of Sephiroth, though in reality you really were of the equal of Sephiroth, though you didn't make it in soldier through conventional means. But that when you're mowing down these troops, these Shinra troops in the submarine, they keep saying things like you or Cloud. They recognize you specifically. It's as if you've taken the place now of Sephiroth, and they have the place of you. And each of them have this very interesting individual story too. And in fact, you even get to see like a captain give a couple of his guys a pep talk right before you're about to brutally murder them, and functionally in their minds as a terrorist, and the bridge of the submarine. And I had a moment of compassion there. a rare moment of video game compassion where I didn't just brutally slay them for their weakness, but that I did save them. And so I'm getting caught up thinking about saving those poor men in the submarine now.
I mean, I think I see where you're going with that. That sort of parallel that you can sort of see yourself in them, based on what we now know about Cloud's backstory and all that. And
right. So yeah, that was what I was going to know. Sorry, when I trailed off there. Exactly. You're now in the place sort of like Sephiroth, or the recognizable hero who's known for his individuality and his individual actions, even though you just, disunified and like basically went to the nut house for a little while, something sort of shame-inducing or highly embarrassing. But now people are surprised and scared of you in a unique way. And I don't know what level your characters are, but mine are very close to level 50 from where the exact level that Sephiroth was when we first saw him, even though I'm nowhere near as strong as he was at this point.
well, yeah, I mean, maybe you are though, right? Relative to these soldiers that you're fighting, these Shinra minions who are sort of just pathetic, right? And the game seems to go out of its way to invite you to see that connection by sort of personalizing these particular soldiers a bit more, or these Shinra guys a bit more. And I think it is interesting how it gives you the option to spare them and take them as hostages rather than fighting them at the end there. And I read about that too online to see if it made a difference to the story at all. It doesn't seem like it does. So that's a little bit of a, superficial thing, but at least it's making a gesture at, like, you have to make a real decision there. There's a game that's come out not too long ago now called Undertale that the whole premise of the game and the theme of the game like revolves around the question of whether you should be fighting enemies or whether you can find other ways to progress the story, basically by being merciful towards all the enemies that you find. And so Undertale, takes that exact kind of question and makes it integral to the story. Whereas here, it's sort of just an extra little thing that is worth noticing and all that. But anyway, I mean, I think the connection that you're making between Cloud and these individuals, the way that they see him is potentially as he saw Sephiroth. I think that would be really interesting if there was also the age difference sort of thing at play. And in that respect, I actually think that his relationship with Sid is kind of reinforced here again. Like, Sid is kind of this older version of who Cloud potentially could be as well. And Sid has been like sort of the leader while Cloud was out of commission. So there's kind of a bit of a relationship that's developed there. The other sort of alter ego, who you get a little bit of his backstory at this point, is Vincent. So if you go with the sub to the waterfall area, then you see a bit more of the story of Vincent's like love, I don't know, sort of like abbreviated little romantic story plays out there. And so I think, yeah, there's some like gestures at that kind of relationship or storyline. They're not super developed though. This whole part of the game feels a bit rushed, frankly.
And could you go into that Lucretia side quest a little bit and what it is that it reveals beneath the water, beneath the waves?
Yeah, it's a bizarre little episode because I don't know. Personally, I didn't even put Vincent in my party like a single time through the whole game, so he's just kind of always lurking there, and that seems to be what he's for. But it is a pretty cool use of the world in that you can use the sub to get to places above ground which you otherwise aren't able to go, again, unless you have one of the special breeds of chocobo. And so you progress there by kind of plunging into the depths, literally, and then sort of resurfacing. And when you go behind the waterfall, you find this kind of shining light, like almost an altar back there. And it seems like there's this ghost of Lucretia. When you talk to them, they produce this vision of what Vincent was like as a young Turk, basically, first arriving at Shinra Mansion in the company of the body of soldiers and scientists, and you find out a little bit about the experimentations that were conducted down there in the basement. Not much about it. You see but don't really hear. You don't see any text. You just see like little images of Vincent and Lucretia sneaking around together, and then she's with someone else, one of the scientists, and oh my gosh, now his heart is broken, and then he's experimented on to just make things worse, right? And then locked in the crypt, basically. So it's a bit enigmatic. It's obscure. I believe that there's some much more like fleshed out versions of that story that have been released since, but I am not familiar with them. And I mean, again, I think it's like this is a place where the designers clearly had a lot more that they might have wanted to do with the game, but they just weren't able to put it in there. They just kind of gesture at it instead.
And so what do you think about in this part of the game as we're revisiting parts once known, now unknown, where we can receive new items and new information? For example, like in Bugenhagen's case, in Cosmo Canyon, also Fort Condor returning there, also Junon returning there, while also discovering new places like the submarine. But what do you think of the place of Sephiroth in all of this? It's almost as if he's taken a back seat or fallen into the background while all these sort of proximal tasks take over. And in fact, Weapon seems to be the main antagonist now, and Sephiroth sort of like plan. He's sort of like an evil Zeus, like a designer of the plan and the current stage, but we haven't yet earned the right to get at him.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there is this kind of fortress of solitude aspect to the northern cave thing, right? It's like you can't access it. He's not coming out. He seems to have set his plan in motion and is content to sort of be aloof. He's not controlling Cloud anymore. It's unclear whether he's even able to after Cloud's experiences with the life stream and sort of putting his mental self in order. So
good point.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I think that we are supposed to sort of forget about Sephiroth for a bit. It seems like he's not the main enemy anymore. Like, he's not defeating him or not defeating him wouldn't make a difference with respect to Meteor at this point. So he's kind of in the background. And the Weapon thing, I mean, it is interesting when you think about Weapon being a manifestation of the planet itself. That looks a little different than the way that Shinra is trying to deal with them by sort of like fighting against them in very overt ways with giant cannons and things. So, I think we're supposed to sort of maybe be questioning what our relationship to Weapon is. Again, I think there's an echo of Avalanche and Weapon that might just kind of be in the background as well.
Yeah, especially when you are explicitly compared to terrorists again. You are called a terrorist when you confront Shinra again, and they have this palpable fear of you. And so, and Barrett even brings up that you've come a long way since the beginning. When you jump into the submarine, it's like when you first jumped into a train car together. And he's like, Cloud, now you're the leader. I used to be the leader. How things have changed. And so there are echoes back to the beginning here, which I think are very interesting. But I also now want to ask you a little bit about the Rocket Town episode and the tale of redemption of Shara, and how Shara was right about engine number 8 the whole time, and that she helps to save Sid's life now for a second time, and sort of what you thought about that redemption theme popping up here, and what its relevance was to the main narrative, and how that connects to your hypothesis that Sid is sort of an older version of Cloud. Again, get into that version question, those numbers questions, those type questions.
I found it very sort of like fitting the way that Shira is there all along, and she comes out and like physically lifts the blown up metal thing off of Sid. Apparently, your absurdly powerful characters are not able to lift it. They're struggling with it, but then Shira comes through and just like, has an incredible physical strength that's such that she can move it for you. I found that a little bit funny, but fitting. Like that seems right. And there's a kind of redemption there, that she proves right all along, and it's in such a way that Sid can't possibly ignore it. Like it seems like he always sort of knew that she was right, but now he's got the scars to prove it. And the way that this happens, as you're actually in space, like he gets to have that as well. That's what he wanted all along, was to be in space. He sort of realizes that, and he says later, like after you come down, it involves him realizing something about the planet as well, right? How small and how in need of protection it is in the grand scheme of things. So he has a kind of revelation up there, that seems, connected with the way that Shira cares for him and has been caring for him all along. He sort of finally realizes that, and it's very heroic sort of music playing, and there's that weird moment where you have to solve a code to try to get some huge materia. I mean, it doesn't really matter whether you get it or not, though. So that I always found kind of strange. Like, I don't know how you're supposed to figure that out without cheating, basically. But anyway, how did you do it?
Oh no, I did cheat. I checked JAG. It was the first thing I did. I was like, I remember this from last time. This was a real bummer. I'm not going to do this again. But I was also thinking a little bit about what you said last time about how it only took you 2 hours to get a golden chocobo, and I thought also about how I think it took me something like 20 hours when I was young. And I was like, was that because I was really bad? And there were moments where my frustration would get the best of me, and I would just continually do dumb things, and I stubbornly wouldn't look something up, and I would look for it myself, and it would just take way too long. And the way that, like, when you're dumb and misguided when you're young, you can just take way too long. But I know also I had a sense of not wanting to finish. And I thought about that with a lot of things in my life. I remember it was that way sort of in graduate school even, and the end of high school, like moments that are good that you want to stretch on into infinity, sort of like the Phykeans say, our nights are endless. And so, it's a bore just to sleep through them. We might as well have a story. But I realized so much of what I loved about this game, and this is a point that I think you made about Harry Potter earlier on, is not in the game itself, but what I brought to the game and the time I spent sort of idling about in the game just to be in that world that made sense, where I felt important. And to that point, I was thinking about on the second disc, how much of my experience and how much of your recent experience, which I've been missing, is rooted in the side quest, the things you can do in addition to just enjoy playing the video game, essentially, without pushing the narrative forward. And of course, getting additional items that will help you in the narrative, like the Golden Chocobo, and of course, Knights of the Round, though I was thinking about never using summons again, because they really do take your time away, which I thought was a good real world point you made about Knights of the Round. It is a time suck. Yeah, so that's what I'm wondering.
I mean, I totally agree. The whole experience of playing this game was definitely much more than progressing the story and getting to see what happens next. Like that's a powerful pull, but I think at least as powerful is, I want to, see what's over there and see if I can get to there and see if I can defeat this enemy. Like how can I optimize my team a little better? That's also something the game clearly wants you to be engaged with, continually, like exploring, fiddling with stuff, trying things out, just playing. That's what makes it a game rather than simply a kind of interactive book or something. And so I don't want to, yeah, downplay that too much, but at the same time, if you're, you know, busy doing a lot of other things, then you want to see a slightly more streamlined way to get that dang gold chocobo, and to have that kind of satisfaction of figuring something out, right? Of seeing it through to its conclusion, whether it be the side quest or the main quest. And I think we've been striking a pretty good balance there. I know we have probably rushed through a lot of things that otherwise could have been, muddled through with with some good results as well. But the last time I talked to Vince, who started this project with us, like whenever we did start it a while ago, last thing I heard from him basically was that he was just like having fun racing chocobos and couldn't get enough of that. And I mean, there's something to that. Like it's pretty satisfying to just do chocobo races and win prizes and be all sort of blinking your way along with your gold chocobo. That's cool. Uh, it's it's something that the game is designed to do. Again, at least as much as it's designed to sort of grip your emotions with a deep story or something.
Right, and these become the figures that during the moments in which we're imprinting, they become those sort of figures for courage for us, like the Harry Potters and the Clouds, the people that face the darkness within themselves, and so that when we have those sorts of moments, they grip us. And so these characters, if we met them, and we did meet them, Harry Potter and Cloud, both I think when we were like 12, also Ash Ketchum and Pikachu. um, these characters, they become we would imagine them and construct stories and narratives ourselves. And when we went through our days, these characters would be in our fantasies and our imaginations in the same way that in medieval times, probably Jesus and the saints would be as a Catholic. And so it is interesting how much we brought our developmental level of consciousness to these games, and to what extent they were like psychopomps, sort of developing us into more sophisticated individuals. And just along that line, it's very interesting to what extent, as I get better at games, I get better at strategizing games. And so this most recent boss battle, I had Reagan on all, so I knew how to have a long-term strategy over the battle, and I actually got to set up a strategy, which gave me some pleasure. I need to read some Clausewitz soon on war, and so but I cast barrier on everybody, Reagan on everybody, haste on everybody, slow on the enemy. It was great. I was killing it, except for the first time I went through, I idiotically had a reflect ring on, so when I cast Reagan and barrier, both those got cast on the enemy, and it pissed me off so much that I ended up turning the game console off and starting over like a child. But I was pretty upset about that. But so I do still make childish errors, but my strategy was on point, and that actually gave me quite a bit of pleasure. Whereas when I would have gone through that when I was younger, the monotony of not just cruising through a boss would have caused fear and anxiety, and I wouldn't have spent the time necessary to really wall up this guy.
Yeah, I've heard that name Clausewitz. I doubt that he will have much to say about regen spells and magic barriers. Although, who knows? Maybe but the idea of strategy, right, and being sort of able to even think strategically and not just get upset by losing and all that sort of thing. Yeah, that does seem like a mark of a certain amount of maturity. And like, fighting that boss, yeah, he's a pretty tough boss no matter what you go into the battle equipped with. Um, it's a good question though, like how much to sort of strategize and how much more maybe you learn um, by sort of trying things out and getting to make certain errors and things, because that's that reset button is another thing that Clausewitz would not have had at his disposal. So I think strategy might be something that is really only applicable in situations where you have to plan out beforehand. You can't just reset and try again. And in that sense, it's a little bit antithetical to playing games. You don't want to strategize too much. It makes it less fun in a way.
Well, in Orson Scott Card's Ender's Game, the ultimate strategy is a game. And the students seem to be spending all their time, in these simulations in order to improve themselves. And so the idea behind the simulation seems to be that you can run strategies at a relatively low cost, and that the best strategies that you implement are going to be ones, and this is what I think a game is, and what Metal Gear Solid draws our attention to, is that you implement a strategy, but you also have to adapt and be flexible in your implementation because new things come up. And so I would say, like Nassim Taleb suggests, you can't just rationally understand the world. You have to, put things out in it and go step by step in order to learn how things actually are. And that's a non-intellectual way of learning, but a very serious one. I definitely have been learning from my mistakes while I play against these bosses, but I also can appreciate now being able to lay out an actual battle strategy and implement one against a boss rather than, just like button mash against an enemy and hope that it finishes as quickly as possible. And so I'm also noticing sort of economies of scale when it comes to my investing in materia now, as well as sort of taking a pleasure in fighting the random battles just because of how much experience they are now giving me and how much skill I get from them. I'm making a lot more money faster at this point in the game. And also all my materia is starting to level up faster too. And so there's sort of this sense of progress and increased progress or sped up progress at this part of the game too. I was wondering if you also noticed that or felt it.
Yeah, definitely. There's something really satisfying about figuring out a good way to quickly clear out enemies and just going around and doing that a few times and not having to do it very often to start to see some results, right? And like you've got some weapons at this point that have got some either really high attack power or a bunch of materia slots on them, so you can kind of optimize your party for physical or for magical stuff, for materia growth. You have double and maybe even some triple growth weapons at this point. That's that helps you feel like you're investing time well, at least for me. And so there's also the element of in these boss battles, I think these are some of the first ones where you can actually steal items from the boss. I think that reflect ring that you mentioned, isn't that one that you either win or steal from a boss? And when you fight Rude, each time that you fight him at this point in the game, there's a few chances. Each time you can steal like probably the most powerful armor in the game from him, the Zedric. And I'm not sure exactly what Zedric is supposed to refer to, but it sounds pretty much like Siegfried, right? The Dragon Slayer. So as an armor, it seems like a pretty worthwhile one to, strategize in the sense of you can't kill them too quickly. You have to you have to not kill them until you steal the items that they have.
Yeah, and to make sure that you continue playing the game in a way where you have a healthy respect for more than just killing. And it's interesting. I do want to hear your perspective on this Undertale game and a little bit more about it, because I think I've heard you speak about it some with one of your guests when you were going through Earthbound. But well, I guess even before I ask that question, I'm going to ask a more global question, just because we didn't go through a ton of games this time around, and I'm still trying to catch up with you. I know we got into the side quest bit of this a bit, but what is it that you got out of going through Earthbound, and are you getting the same thing out of this? Because I think I found what I was looking for about in the middle of this program, and it's like I got released from a poltergeist and I could grow up again, or just grow up in the first place.
Are you talking about Sephiroth?
Well, I think I understood the value and the message behind this game and any game like this, which is to get out into the world and, do your best. And that you can't do that just by playing video games. And that if you just continue to play video games, you don't, as wonderful as they are and as good part of one's life as they can be, it's like one should not be wishing that they live in a video game. One should understand that a video game is trying to push one into life.
Yeah. See, I think that is pretty much the lesson that I feel like you get from Earthbound as well. It's told in a very different way. It's a very different experience for me playing these two games. I don't feel the same kinds of nostalgia, sense of accomplishment, any of that sort of thing. Those are all sort of more immediate things. But that ultimate sense of, what is the game really teaching you? Yeah, it does seem to be the same sort of general idea that you have this experience within which you are, saving the world, right? But what that really means is that you don't get to stay in that world. And that's also, I think what a lot of fantasy books and things are about too. They might tell you a story about an imagined world. One way or the other, it's important to kind of come back to the real one when you're done reading, right? And in some sense, I don't know to what extent that might be part of. I'm just going to kind of theorize a little, but I think that might be part of the general abandonment of organized religion, insofar as the traditional religious frameworks tend to emphasize an escape from mortality and the world. They don't seem to answer to that sense that people have, that they really do want to be in the world and improve it and make it better. And I think that there's much more to traditional religion than that, but I think that that's one thing that people can easily sort of put their finger on and say, that doesn't ring true to me anymore. I don't want that, And so I think that it's really interesting the ways in which some of the deeper religious, mythological teaching can take place within a story which is presented as a game, which is emphatically about, finishing the story and returning to your real world, right? And I think in a weird way, playing these games then helps me go back and read some of those classic texts and things and read them in a slightly more, open-minded way. And that's kind of what I've been trying to do with the Earthbound project more, is sort of like tie it to great texts and things. With the Final Fantasy project, it has been more about sort of the psychological, scientific, if you like, approach to that same kind of problem.
Yeah, and it makes me think quite a bit about our recent discussions with scholars on Dungeons and Dragons and anime and just these leisure activities that are narratively driven, with these sort of cartoonish characters within these oversimplified worlds. Oversimplified meaning much more simple than the actual complex world. That there are coherent narratives, there are, you know, boundaries between good and evil, though I suppose the great works make those more permeable and difficult. But these worlds are sort of like estuaries in which you grow your moral fiber and see which virtues are best expressed and which vices you would like to run away from. And so it seems as if part of the function of this game is to help shape your consciousness and develop your culture, because it's like one spends so much time playing these games during such an important part of one's life. It's like middle school and high school, you know, even an anime theme is to be hitting the books really hard at those times. They're so important. It's like one is about to go to college or get out of your house for the first time, or get a professional job or develop some training for a job. And yet I remember spending hours and hours a day playing video games. And so they occupied this tremendous mental space and actual space in my life. And it's like, what was it that they were training me to do that they were optimized to do, and that you know, the real world itself wasn't? I guess correlate or secondary to that or after that would be, you know, once I think if you answer that question in this way, which might be that the game is supposed to sort of prepare you to be the hero in whatever your story happens to be in life, and that you should live out a narrative in which you attempt to be good, you know, when do you put down the controller and get into the world, and how do you do that?
Right on. Yeah. And I mean, that's why, again, I think that games, you know, have always been associated more so with childhood. When grown-ups play games, there's something less than pure about it at times. And I mean, I think that one answer to that is that as our sense of what childhood means has sort of grown and developed, like childhood itself is extended a lot longer than it has ever been, maybe indefinitely for some people, right? Or that's sort of an option now for the first time in history, for many, many more people than it ever was. Then it becomes really important, to ask that question, to pose that question, and to see ways in which games can be used to transcend themselves, right? Can sort of contain within themselves their own answer to that question. That does seem right to me. And, you know, it can still be fun to play games. Like I still love playing sports. I still love playing video games, obviously. But I think that there's other sorts of things, other sorts of activities that bring me, you know, more pleasure. One of them happens to be, you know, applying my intellect to the activities, which I sort of loved less reflectively as a kid. But that, you know, again, is one activity among many.
Well, it's interesting too, because it's almost like, and I don't want to make this abstruse on purpose, but it's almost like the Hegelian dialectic of going from subjective to objective and thus understanding a concept perfectly, which, you know, we have these very, very subjective experiences growing up that actually happen to be fairly similar according to type, right? These imprinting experiences. That's why these games affect us so similarly. That's why we call them great, because of the similarity of effect. But now that we come back to these games, now that we've developed sort of the desire to analyze, and we're continually improving at our ability to parse things out and to express what it is we see these games, we see not only that the effect the games had on us was a generalized effect, or an effect that they would have had on anybody like us at that time, but we also can see the game sort of within a much richer hierarchy of narrative and story, with a much stronger apparatus too, right? Now we see we read Harry Potter, we understand Dumbledore as a figure for God the Father. And, you know, his difficulty with Fudge is sort of the difficulty between Christ and Caesar always. And that's good. And going back through this game that, you know, and this figure that seemed like a god, Sephiroth, and everybody knew he was sort of bad, but I sort of had an idealized version of this character that I carried around with me. And now that I go back to the game, you know, he's just sort of a Luciferian figure, and the Luciferian figure always loses, essentially for platonic reasons, that they just can't, you know, muster up the same support. The good people can, but they just don't. They don't continue to pursue virtue. They forget to do that which made them great in the first place. They move in the wrong direction. They experience the fall, and it's just so common a motif at this point, going through these major epics, that it's sort of the enrapturing or siren-like magic that this idealized version of this character had, that I could say that probably has had some disastrous effects on other people's lives, you know, kind of fell away from me. And that's sort of the magic of seeing these worlds now with clearer eyes and within a scale of, you know, years and years of studying stories at this point.
Yeah, and to be able to then sort of, I don't know, find the essence of that, convey it, and help people to apply it for themselves. Yeah, seems like a really worthwhile project. Once you sort of get into the deeper psychological, mythological, like, threads within the story, there's so much there to kind of like play around with. I agree that it's important not to lose sight of an overarching sort of narrative, which comes first, and specifically how that narrative like actually impacts what people do in their lives, what they're like when they're not playing the game. I mean, I think, you know, again, great stories tend to help with reflecting about morality or you know, what your purpose in life is, or questions like those. But, you know, clearly for our generation, these video games also play that same kind of role. The other thing that I would say about Sephiroth particularly, is that his story is, you know, continues to be a fascinating one. Maybe even more so because you can sort of understand it better now, right? Like, it's not that he's no longer interesting when you can sort of translate his story onto a Luciferian story or something like that. It becomes maybe even more interesting, right? You see more aspects of his character, ways in which he does and does not fit that sort of framework or concept, and the ways specifically, like you said, in which that character like had an impact on you, and how you've sort of changed your perspective on that. Like, all of that is, I mean, really, really rich. It's not, I think, any less powerful than, you know, reading Milton's Paradise Lost, right? And like having to confront a very interesting Satan in that poem, or like reading, for me at least, reading Philip Pullman and sort of learning about Milton and Blake and these other authors through that story, right, which explicitly references those earlier works. That might be an even better kind of analog to what it's like to play this game, insofar as it might precede in your experience those greater works, but it certainly is deepened, and in turn helps you access. It's deepened by and helps you access those other works.
Right. A claim made by the Jungians and by Peterson is that a character in a story is an embodied personality and narrative. And what an archetype is a historical personality. And so when I say Sephiroth is like the devil, the devil is an archetypal personality that finds itself injected as the malevolent force in any tale. So Sauron in Lord of the Rings, Voldemort in Harry Potter, Sephiroth in Final Fantasy VII, the devil in Christianity. And so what Wes, I think, is saying and agreeing with is that archetype comes through in different ways depending on what the narrative is and depending on how good the narrative is in much more complex ways. But I was saying I'm now noticing sort of those commonalities. And then Wes, I think you were saying that also opens the door to a more sophisticated analysis of what's happening. You cannot change the basic overall structure of narrative, but you can watch how it unfolds in its particular way. You can't change the fact that you're looking at a rose blossom, but every season it will look slightly different. And noticing those changes is what is the richest possible source of information.
Yeah, when you bring up the rose, I mean, that makes me think of the Little Prince, right? Like on his planet, he's got the one rose. He thinks, she's the only one, and then he comes to Earth and he sees that there's many, many other roses, right? It's kind of that process.
Precisely that. I think that's a beautiful metaphor to end on. That's wonderful, Wes. Well, thank you for meeting on Saturday today. And just to throw out some hate, go Rams, not Patriots tomorrow. I'm sure you don't know, but the Super Bowl's tomorrow, Wes, for the other kind of football, the kind I think you don't like as much. And so, well, thank you for doing this today.
Yeah, my pleasure. I wasn't aware who exactly was playing. I did know the Super Bowl tomorrow because you told me, and I'm happy to get to talk today. Yeah, enjoy.
All right, will do. And I think we're scheduled to talk again on Monday, and we got to put out another night school on our new favorite, Robert Frost, soon.
Yeah, we'll have to find time.
Yes. All right. Till then.
All right, take